6a, addition, subtraction of fractions. Okay, so now that we've dealt with fractions, we're going to look into adding and subtracting fractions. Now, I will tell you that with fractions, it's actually easier to multiply and divide fractions than it is to add and subtract. That's not saying that addition and subtraction is difficult. It's just there are more steps involved for you to add and subtract fractions than there are to multiply and divide fractions. So let's get started with it. One of the most important things with adding or subtracting fractions is that you have to have a common denominator. What I mean by that is 2/5 plus 1/5 is much easier to multiply than, to add, than 2/3 plus 1/5. Notice that in this top one, 2/5 plus 1/5, we have that common denominator of 5. Well, what you can think of this denominator as is, don't think of it as a fraction so much as just an item. You can even think of these as apples. We have apples underneath this one and apples underneath that one. If we have 2 apples and we get 1 more apple, then we have a total of 3 apples, right? So if the denominator is the same, you're actually adding the same type of item, which makes it easy. You just add the numerators and put it over that item. Whereas if we had 2 apples, or actually let's call this one oranges since we used 5 as apples. If we had 2 oranges and 1 apple, and we say, okay, how many, well, we don't have just apples, we don't have just oranges. So we would need to come to some common ground with that. So you know what they say, you can't mix apples and oranges? So if we have a common denominator, all we have to do is add the numerator. Same thing with subtraction. If we have a common denominator, all we have to do is subtract the numerators. And we'll do some examples of these. If you do not have a common denominator, then the first thing you have to do is come up with a common denominator. Well, how do we come up with a common denominator? Well, you've done this before. You're looking for a common multiple. So we're looking at 3 and 5, and we can go 3 plus 3 is 6, plus 3 is 9, plus 3 is 12, plus 3 is 15, plus 3 is 18, right? So we've got 3 multiples of 3, and then 5, we've got 5, 10, 15, 20, and we go, oh, look, there we go. 15 is a common multiple. Now, just as we did previously, we just want to rewrite each of these fractions with a denominator of that new common multiple. So we look at it and go, okay, 3 times what gives me 15? 3 times 5 gives me 15. So if we multiply the bottom by 5, we've got to multiply the top by 5. So we end up with 2 times 5 is 10, 3 times 5 is 15, plus, well, if we want to get 15, 5 times what gives me 15? 3. So if we multiply the denominator by 3, we're going to multiply the numerator by 3. 1 times 3 is 3. 5 times 3 is 15. And now we're dealing with a common denominator. We have 10 fifteenths plus 3 fifteenths. We have 10 bananas plus 3 bananas gives me 13 bananas, or 13 fifteenths. So that's our process for either adding or subtracting fractions, is we need to make sure we have a common denominator. If we don't, we have to create one by going through our process. So let's do some examples here. 7/23 plus 9/23. So the first thing we look at is, do we have a common denominator? 23, 23, yes we do. Okay, so we're dealing with the same thing, so automatically that common denominator can be put off to the side for the equals, right? Because we start with 7/23, we add 9 more 23, 7 plus 9 is 16/23. Okay, so far so good. What if I have 7/12 plus 1/12? Again, I look and first I see, do I have a common denominator? 12 and 12? Yes, I do. So common denominator, so that means I can leave the denominator as 12 because I have 7/12 plus 1/12. 7 plus 1 is 8, so I have 8/12. But remember, the last thing we always do is we want to simplify the fraction. So we're not going to leave it as 8/12, so I say, well, wait a second. 8 and 12 are both divisible by 2, which 8 divided by 2 is 4, 12 divided by 2 is 6. And I go, are we done yet? No, 4 and 6 are both divisible by 2 also. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and we end up with 2/3. Well, how does this work with subtraction? Well, let's give it a shot. Instead of having that adding, let's subtract. I have 7/12 and I take away 1/12. Common denominator, 12. 7 minus 1 is 6. If I have 7 bananas and I take away 1 banana, I'm left with 6 bananas. But 6/12, we see we can reduce that. They're both divisible by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 12 divided by 6 is 2. And we end up with 1/2. So as I said, not bad when you're dealing with a common denominator. If we don't have that common denominator, we're going to have to do a little more work. So what if I have 5/6 minus 1/4? So 5/6 minus 1/4. And I look and the first thing I go is like, do I have a common denominator? No, I do not. 6 and 4 are not the same. Okay? Now, I'm going to tell you what not to do. So please don't do this. Do not take 6 minus 4 and make it 2. Do not. No, bad, wrong. Okay? We need a common denominator, and how we do that is we need to find multiples of 6 and 4 and use one of those multiples. So remember, we have 6 plus 6 is 12, plus 6 is 18, plus 6 is 24. We have 4 plus 4 is 8, plus 4 is 12. I don't have to go any further because I see that I've got 12. Now remember, you could have just multiplied these together to a common denominator. 6 times 4 is 24, but you can see that by using this method we were able to get a smaller common denominator, in this case the least common denominator. So I'm going to rewrite this over 12. So that means 5/6, to turn 6 into 12 I have to multiply by 2. So I'm going to do that to the top also. 5 times 2 is 10. 6 times 2 is 12. To turn 4 into 12 I need to multiply by 3. So I'm going to do that on the top also. 1 times 3 is 3. Oops. 1 times 3 is 3. 4 times 3 is 12. Now I have a common denominator. 10/12 minus 3/12. 12 and 12, so common denominator stays 12. 10 minus 7 and 3 is 7. So we have 7/12. Nothing to reduce. 7/12 doesn't reduce. So we're good. Let's try another one. You see, this isn't that bad. What if I have 17/5 minus 11/4? 17/5 minus 11/4. You'll notice now that we have improper fractions, 17/5, 11/4. That's okay. In fact, we're going to get into stuff in the later section where we'll deal with something similar to this, but we'll actually bring in mixed numbers. But right now, 17/5 minus 11/4 do not have a common denominator, therefore we need to find a common denominator. Well, I can look at this and I can tell you the common denominator is going to be 20. If you don't believe me, you do 5, 10, 15, 20, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. So we're looking for a common denominator of 20. So we're going to end up with something over 20 minus something else over 20. 5 times 4 gives me 20, so I multiply that by 4, which means I'm going to multiply the top by 4. 17 times 4 is 68. Four times 5 gives me 20, so I need to multiply that by 5 and multiply that by 5. 11 times 5 is 55. So 68/20 minus 55/20. So 68 of these minus 55 of these gives me 13 of those. So 13/20. And then we look and say, well, do we have to reduce? Well, 13 is a prime number, so unless 20 is divisible by 13, there's nothing to reduce. And that's really what there is to adding and subtracting fractions. Key thing is you need a common denominator. If they already have a common denominator, fine. Subtract, keep the denominator the same. Just think of the denominator as talking about what you're dealing with. I'm dealing with fifths. I'm dealing with fourths. So denominator is just what you're dealing with. It's just the same as dealing with 5 bicycles and 4 skateboards. Or so I'd say 17 bicycles and 11 skateboards. Can't do anything with them as of that point in time. I need a common denominator. Right? So to get the common denominator, you're looking for common multiples of those two fractions. Do not add or subtract the denominators. We're looking for a common multiple to get the common denominator. So there you go, addition, subtraction of fractions.